Chapter 3. In 1999, at an age of 22 years old, I went to Salis, Mississippi to live with my grandparents. During the time I stayed with them, I had another church experience. You see, there was this girl and, yep, there truly was a girl that I thought was pretty. I met her one night while out eating with my grandparents at a Chinese restaurant. She was our server, and I was mesmerized by her looks. I got her number that night and eventually got her to go out with me. Of course, one of the places she invited me to was her church. Her church was a little smaller than the last one I was in. It also seemed less formal, more laid back. I liked it, and I liked her. I went down to the front of that church too. I already knew that it was a good way to impress the girl, and I repeated the words after the preacher. It was easier this time. One Sunday, I had decided to tell the preacher that I wanted to give my life to his church. The preacher corrected me and said that I give it to God, not a church. I, of course, had no idea what I was saying. I just thought that my new girlfriend was hot, and I could picture us getting married and coming to church every Sunday. I had even decided to move from my grandparents' house to live in a small trailer park right up the road from her house. That way I could see her more. I guess that is when things got a little too serious for her because she ended up breaking up with me shortly after that. Of course, she was only 16 at the time and had definitely made the right decision because all I really wanted to do was get in her pants. Needless to say, I didn't go back to her church again. Shortly after that, there was another girl and another church, and of course another visit to the front to repeat the prayer and get, quote, saved. I even got baptized at this one. She and the church ended like all the rest, but she eventually gave me what I wanted one time before we broke up. And of course, I never went back to her church. The years following that, I worshiped my career at Enterprise Rent-A-Car. I had started working there earlier that summer when I had first moved from my grandparents' house to the trailer park up the road from the 16-year-old. There had not been many job opportunities in the small town of Grenada, Mississippi at the time, and I surely didn't know anything about renting cars, but I badly needed a job, and I was becoming desperate. I had moved from South Carolina to live with my grandparents with no money or possessions. I had begged my dad to let me borrow the initial $250 deposit and the $250 for the first month's rent. I was now into my second month of being in the trailer with no job. The only reason I was hired by Enterprise Rent-A-Car was because I lied on the job application. I had marked that I had a 4-year college degree, even though I had only been for 2. I figured that it would look impressive and I didn't want to take any chances of not being hired. I didn't know it at the time, but apparently Enterprise would only hire college graduates. Thankfully, they never asked me for any type of proof. One day I was talking to my area manager about what kind of pay people made in the company. At that time, I was only making $8 per hour as a trainee. Everyone at Enterprise starts out in the company as a trainee, regardless of your prior experience, and they mainly focus on college graduates. He proceeded to tell me that he was only in his 3rd year with the company and was already going to make $100,000 that year. Before he had told me that, I had intentions of going back to college later that fall. But now, that plan flew out of the window of my mind. Why in the world would I go back to college for 2 more years to get a degree just to get a job that I already have now? I thought. 3 years from now, I could be making $100,000. I was sold. I thought about my job day and night. I focused all of my attention on moving up the company like he had done and making more money. He became my mentor and my idol. I wanted to be just like him. I decided that I was going to move up the company ladder as fast as he did, and that within 3 years I was going to be wealthy. I truly began worshiping that company. I spent all of my time learning and absorbing the car rental business, Anytime there was an opportunity to move up the ladder, I did it. Within 6 months, I took the grill. The grill is a verbal test that is administered by the branch manager and the area manager. They grill you with lots and lots of questions about the company. If you pass, your title now becomes a manager assistant, and you are eligible to apply for an assistant manager position whenever one becomes available. Shortly after passing the grill, an opportunity for an assistant manager position became available in Corinth, Mississippi. I eagerly applied, and I was the chosen one. So with much excitement, I packed up and I moved to Corinth, Mississippi, to be an assistant manager of a brand new store that had just been built. There were only 2 employees there as the store first opened, just myself and my branch manager, Terry. Terry and I quickly made a name for ourselves in Corinth. The branch soon became profitable, and we were being noticed in the company. Within 6 months after opening the store, I was able to score a manager position down in Crestview, Florida. Before I tell you about Crestview, I should probably back up to some things that happened while I was living in Corinth. It's about another church experience. During my 6 months in Corinth, I started dating another girl. I spent most of my weekends playing sand volleyball at the lake, and she was always there playing too. I really didn't find her that attractive, but she looked good enough to sleep with, even though we didn't do much sleeping. We dated for a while and ended up spending quite a bit of time together. We even went to church together from time to time on Sundays. Volleyball, of course, came first, but her dad was the preacher there, and he would always do his best to convince us to go. I remember one time sitting in church with her, and her dad gave an invitation for people to come up and be saved. I had already convinced her and her dad that I had been saved, so I never went. But this Sunday, I asked her if she had ever gone up to the front of her dad's church, and this is what she said. "No, I'm not ready to give my life to God yet because I'm afraid that He might ask me to quit playing volleyball, and I love volleyball too much." I had never thought about it that way. It had always seemed like an easy thing to do to me. Some time goes by, and we continued to fornicate as often as we got the chance. She seemed to enjoy it as much as I did. One night, I had exited sooner than she wanted me to, because I had already reached my feel-good moment. She had not reached hers yet, and wanted me to go back in so she could finish. I thought I had emptied myself good enough before going back in, but we found out a month or so later that I must not have. She was pregnant. Growing up, I had always told myself that if I ever had kids, I would never make them go through what I went through. My parents had separated when I was 5, and it devastated me. I grew up for most of my childhood not knowing my dad, and it affected me so badly that I swore to myself that I would never make my children experience that kind of anguish. So after I found out she was pregnant, I had decided that there was no other choice but to marry her. I asked her to marry me, and of course she said yes. She was excited about it. We went to the jewelry store in the mall, and she picked out the rings. They were cheap ones, but we didn't have much money at the time. We planned out all the details of the wedding and set the date. Well, she did all of the planning. I just told her to tell me the time and the place, and I would be there. It was happening very quickly, and I'm not quite sure how much time had passed, but one day while she was over at my house, she began screaming in pain while she was in the bathroom. I ran to the door and asked her, "What is wrong?" She said that she didn't know, but she had this severe pain in her stomach. I had no idea what to do. I didn't call the ambulance, and I just sat there hoping that eventually she would be okay. She stayed in there for quite some time, crying and screaming in pain, but eventually she came out. She was completely drained of all strength and had this look on her face as if someone very close to her had just died. I had no idea at the time, but she had been in there having a miscarriage. Before I knew it, my family were there at my house for the wedding that was going to occur the following day. One of my good friends was there also. Richard had driven all the way from South Carolina to be with me at my wedding. We were hanging out at my house that day, and he began questioning me. He asked me why I was getting married and if I truly loved her. I guess I didn't sound too sure of myself as I answered these questions because he continued to question me to the point where I finally realized that I truly did not love her. He convinced me that I was making a huge mistake and that I had no reason to marry her now that she was no longer pregnant. So I ended up calling her on the phone that day and told her that I had decided it would be best for us not to get married. It was the day before the wedding. Of course, my decision wasn't received well, and our relationship crumbled soon after.